In this video, I'll show you everything you need to know in order to get good at Graves, who has been and currently is the king of the jungle in today's metagame. Graves is a great champion both for solo queue and in team play because of his ability to carry games by himself and punish enemy junglers for not being careful around his bully playstyle. Welcome to the ultimate guide to Graves in Season 11. Here's a quick breakdown of how we'll be going over the video. I'll touch on a couple of general concepts of Graves' purpose as a champion and what success looks like in games that you're doing well on him. We'll then discuss different components of his kit and how we can work better to optimize each one of these. This includes going over different jungle matchups, rune optimizations, ability maxing, your build, pathing, how to play out ganks, and how to play out each phase of the game. But first, if you haven't yet, please subscribe for more content like this. It's free and you can always unsub if you want later as well. Only 4% of you guys in my audience are currently subbed, so let's get that number on up together. On to the video. For the last while now, Graves has been the #1 jungler in the game for his disgusting combination of a strong early game, high damage, and the potential to completely put teams on his back if he needs to. Although he seemingly lacks good CC and gank setup, he makes up for it hard with his high damage outputs. Here's how you should spec him out. Let's start with your rune page for Graves. There are a ton of decent options for him in this regard because his kit can use so many different runes, but far and away the most consistent rune page for him is the Phase Rush build. Graves does an absolute butt ton of damage, but the main thing bottlenecking him from being able to dish all that damage out onto his enemies is the fact that he lacks enough movement in his kits in order to keep up with them. Phase Rush is perfect for him in this case because it gives Graves a huge burst of movement speed, allowing him to maintain pace with the enemy and secure whatever kills he needs. Graves can take other runes like Fleet Footwork or Electrocute and whatnot, but for the best and most consistent results, Phase Rush is unmatched. For the rest of your primary tree, the best runes are Nimbus Cloak, Absolute Focused, and Water Walking. Nimbus Cloak has been an amazingly strong rune on every jungler for like a long time now, and Graves is no exception to this either. Absolute Focus is also incredibly good on Graves because he's essentially able to maintain near full HP during every clear in the jungle, thanks to the way his auto attacks knock back the jungle camps. He also has some of the highest AD scalings in the game with his Q, so he'll be able to greatly increase his clear speed and upfront damage output in fights with the extra damage up front. For the final tree in Sorcery, Water Walking is just the best rune available in slot, and it's still pretty decent for allowing faster movement around the map and through river. For your secondary tree, most players take Precision in order to access Legend Alacrity, which is an incredibly important rune for rounding out Graves' build and preventing the need for him to build it in his items. Paired with Triumph, you can't really go wrong with the extra damage and survivability here. Like the primary tree, Graves can work well with a lot of different runes in the game, so going Domination or even Inspiration second doesn't sound that bad. The attack speed does help a ton with improving Graves' DPS in the mid game though, so Precision is still the best choice if you can help it. For your rune stats, the best choice is normally attack speed, adaptive force, and your resistances of choice, depending on the matchup. Sometimes scaling HP is also really good as well. Graves is also really strong in the current metagame, not only because of his flexibility in his clears, playstyle, and runes, but also in his build and what items he can take in order to tech against his opponents. There are quite a few mythics and different builds Graves can go for, with a few items being really helpful in defining and enhancing his build. Let's start off with his core items. Kicking off with mythics, Graves has 3 primary items that then allow him to transition his build according to the enemy team comp. These items are Eclipse, Immortal Shield Bow, and Gale Force. Eclipse is really good into teams that generally do not have too much frontline tankiness, as the innate damage and armor penetration that Eclipse brings to the table is really helpful for Graves to chat on his enemies. Enemies that cannot stack armor easily or don't scale too well with it will feel the greatly increased damage that Graves will get once he completes this item. However, Eclipse has been nerfed a few times now, and more players these days have been favoring the other viable mythics instead. The first one of these mythics is Immortal Shield Bow. Positioned more as an AD carry item, Shield Bow actually does a great job at converting Graves into a disgusting frontline drain tank. The item by itself is able to provide up to 27% lifesteal, which on a champion like Graves, who has such high amounts of damage per auto, can see healing amounts of hundreds per auto attack. That's even further enhanced as he progresses deeper into his build. Items like Bloodthirster add even more lifesteal to this Fiesta, and damage pickups like Collector and Infinity Edge are great value adds that give Graves a super solid mid to late game. A similar yet different variant of the Grave crit build is to opt for Gale Force. In my opinion, this is probably the best and most consistent mythic on Graves because it not only makes up for his biggest weakness in his lack of mobility, but Gale Force is also just a really strong item as of the time of recording since it brings so much to the table. The amount of damage it does is so insane for being able to one-shot people in skirmishes or use it to quickly get on and finish off stray enemies. Offering similar stats to that of Shield Bow but trading off the sustain for a bunch more damage, this offered Graves the most versatility as the Chad jungler he needs to be. No matter what mythic you choose though, the current Graves build will always revolve around stacking crit items due to the high scaling and late game power spike that they offer. Graves scales really well with crit because of the unique nature of his auto attacks, so it allows him to get access to a lot of the best Zeal items while still being able to itemize some unique choices like a Bruiser or even like an Assassin. Your typical core after your mythic is to purchase the Collector for its awesome combination of lethality and crit chance, and then branch off your third item based on what the game calls for. If there isn't anything in particular that stands out, or you just happen to be smurfing on the enemy, Infinity Edge is a great pickup here because it provides a spike to your auto attack damage and it's a great transition into the later phases of the game. If you started Shield Bow or are just looking to add more survivability to your kit, Bloodthirster is a great choice for that. For teams with heavy amounts of AD, Graves naturally will be able to succeed since his E can grant him a ridiculous amount of armor. But in those times where he really needs to itemize against heavy AD comps, you can pick up items like Death Stance or Guardian Angel. For armor penetration items, if you haven't opted for anything lethality focused, Graves will work really well with both of the Last Whisper items in the game, but I would edge out Lord Dominik's Regard's combination of crit chance and along with his unique passive to be slightly more valuable than what Seroda's Grudge brings to the table. Graves can also purchase MR items like Mercurial Scimitar or even Mauve Malmortius. If you happen to be going the Shield Bow build, you can even cheese Spirit Visage or after having both Bloodthirster and Shield Bow for extra memes. For opponents that rely on one major ability to win out in fights like Malphite or Orianna, Edge of Night is also a good choice. If you just want more damage, you can just purchase any crit item in the game and you'd probably be pretty well off. Although Graves doesn't need attack speed since he has some from his runes, a Zeal item as your 5th or 6th choice wouldn't hurt as it'll likely round out your crit chance at even 80 or 100% and completes the Exodia build for Graves. Graves has an insane amount of options and flexibility in his builds, and it's definitely one of his greatest strengths, so always keep in mind what options you have when itemizing in your games. One of the main reasons why Graves is so good right now is because he is the current king of the jungle in terms of matchups, with some exceptions. Because he's so strong in the early parts of the game, there are very few junglers that are good right now that can actually properly answer him. Other strong junglers like Olaf or Hecarim might actually lose to Graves in the early phases of the game because of how much armor he gets for free from his E. Having some of the highest damage output in the game at the early levels won't matter if you run into a Graves that has 100 armor at level 1. Because Graves is able to access so much armor for free in the early game, there's essentially no AD in the champion that wouldn't have trouble. The only exceptions are probably Kha'Zix or Olaf because these champions are kind of like 1v1 specialists and will still be able to scrap Graves once he gets a couple of items. Other than that though, Graves will still be able to dominate almost every jungler in the early game uncontested. Most of the opportunity to counter Graves will come from the later stages of the game, as other junglers will be able to pick up some items and have a better answer to Graves. Intuitively speaking, since Graves cheats a lot of his matchups with his armor, what a lot of players do, especially at the higher level, try to counter him with an AP jungler that is able to somewhat match his tempo. In the current meta, the main candidate for that is Taliyah, who does a pretty good job of keeping him at bay. Other good choices are champions like Lilia, Karthus, and Nidalee. I could even see champions like Ivern working out as well. Facing these champions, the matchup tends to be fairly volatile because whoever manages to secure a lead will be the one that will have the initiative for the rest of the game. A lot of junglers in the current metagame can severely punish mistakes and secure an insanely strong lead, so you have to play aggressive but also be calculated or else you could get punished greatly. When you first play Graves, he might feel a little bit unwieldy at first because of how clunky he can be. However, things get a lot cleaner once you implement a couple of the combos he has. The most important combo or weave for Graves is for sure using your E as an auto attack canceller. The E also grants Graves one additional shell for his auto attacks. Canceling your autos with the E is the core to speeding up Graves' tempo and can basically be used everywhere. Clears, increasing DPS and ganks, and weaving other abilities into it as well. Graves' E can also be weaved with other abilities depending on the situation. An example of this is the auto Q E combo, which although isn't going to be that practical in skirmish scenarios, you can save a lot of time weaving in even more between each ability. One thing to note about the E as well is that if you're out of ammo, you can weave any ability with your E, including your ultimate. So feel free to finish combos with the extra auto you get from the E with a weaved R, or close the distance with another E. Pathing on Graves can actually be confusing sometimes, because of how many ways you can actually go about it. Graves is the current king of invading and chatting on the enemy jungler, and it's super hard to deal with him because of his ability to just run over pretty much almost every other jungler in the game. So even though I can suggest a certain path on Graves, you still have to be very map aware and be constantly looking around for potential opportunities to invade. I'll try my best not to be vague, but I think it's best to watch some Graves gameplay on streams or in random other YouTube VODs to get a better feel for what I mean. Graves is very popular at the moment as well, so it won't be really hard to find some example games. In order to succeed and create leads for himself, it's actually very important for Graves to be able to invade because he otherwise might not be able to be as dominant in the later stages of the game. If a level 1 invade is not possible in your case, you should most likely start red and then feel out where the enemy jungler is by watching laners show up to lane late. That will be your indication of which side has leashed. Sometimes you can't find that info and that's okay as well, but it'll make your invades a lot clearer if you have this information, because if you know the enemy jungler is also on the red side and will likely be clearing their red side still, examples of this are like Olaf, Nidalee, Hecarim, you can pass straight to their blue by jumping over the Dragon Pit wall. From there, you can try to take the Gromp 2 if you have time, or if you're confident that you'll be able to run over the enemy jungler if you run into them. Most of the time, since you're such a Chad champion in the early game, you actually want to opt for the second option more often than not. In fact, your path will be so focused on denying the enemy jungler that you actually want to be taking their camp any chance you can get. So in practice, although you'll be clearing on your side sometimes, you always want to invade the enemy jungler if you are stronger than the enemy jungler, if he shows up on the opposite side of the map, or if you have strong lanes and can work with your team to run him over. If you just want a normal looking killer for your first rotation, or absolutely nothing was possible due to a tough matchup like Nidalee or Olaf, then you probably want to start red, do Raptors into your entire blue side, and then fight for the nearby crab. Keeping high farm counts and tempo is quite important on Graves, so afterwards I would recommend resetting and continuing to farm if you can't either invade the enemy jungler or get a good gank angle from this point. Ganking is probably the worst aspect of Graves, since a lot of his strengths rely on skirmishing and fighting the enemy jungler, not providing heavy setup for any laners. His only CC is his W, which is a decently strong slow, but most junglers would desire a little bit more setup than that. However, he does make up for it by just having an insane damage output, so it's honestly better to hope that your teammates can draft champions that can have some stronger setup for you. That's the first step in making sure your ganks are going to work actually, because it's not worth your time to be focusing on ganks that aren't going to be successful. No matter how much your laner may ping or flame you, it's more worth it to focus on the ganks that you think will work out better, because you'll have better knowledge of that as a jungler. For lanes that you can gank, the game gets a lot easier. With any laners that have some sort of CC, Graves can easily pump out all of his damage with his abilities in order to ensure that the gank is successful. As with most ganks, you ideally want to start off your gank from behind the enemy laner for the highest chance of success. If you happen to get this positioning, it's actually really good for Graves' Q because it's able to keep up with the enemy's escape naturally due to its back and forth nature. As you remain behind the enemy and kite back, hold your E until the enemy laner uses flash or their other escape so that you can keep up and maintain pace. You can even use phase rush to keep up with them before using your E as well. If you have your ultimate, you can play around that as your finisher, but otherwise can just continue to pressure the enemy until they hopefully die or burn a lot of resources. Although Graves' ganks are not that strong, they're fairly easy to understand and implement in your own games, so it's not too hard to explain. Graves is a unique jungler in the meta right now for his ability to not only be ridiculously strong in the early game, but also decent in the late game as well. He's not going to be a late game hypercarry like Jungle Karthus or Lilia, but since he relies on building a lot of crit chance to succeed, he's going to have a fairly decent transition into the later minutes. I don't think too much changes here though. When you move on to the teamfight stage, you should be playing around each objective and provide support for your team as they need it. At this stage, I think Graves works best when playing with his team because it best lets him use all of his damage together. It's very easy when you get into giant mosh pits of fights to forget that Graves has such hard-hitting abilities, so a lot of the time he ends up being a valuable asset in these situations. Unlike some junglers like Olaf or Hecarim, Graves can't really be the one that starts a fight due to his obvious lack of CC. This means that ideally you want to be playing front to back in most team fights, and since you do have some range and your abilities will be able to connect with the entire enemy team regardless of your positioning, sometimes a squishy target will actually miss position and that would be a good angle for you to go in and pick them off, but you'd have to be pretty comfortable in Graves to be super successful on this, so I wouldn't fully recommend it without knowing your damage numbers. If all goes well, you'll eventually be able to whittle down the enemy team and win out the fight. Graves kind of plays 5v5 fights like an ADC since he's mainly just a DPS champion, and it's just that he's not as traditional as your Jhin or Misfortune. He focuses on being almost on the side of the fight and sneaking in damage where he can. Overall, Graves is still one of the best junglers right now thanks to his incredible amount of early game pressure and ability to completely punish and run over players that aren't able to take him down. He's a great addition to any good jungler's kit, and it's best to make good use of him while you can. That's it from me. Hope you guys enjoyed this guide, and stay fresh, brothers.